So Andy, I've heard you talk a lot about compassionate communities. What are they?
A compassionate community is a place where everyone knows that they matter, where people can rely on each other to be there, be present, be warm, humane, kind, patient, sensitive. One of the ways that we think about compassion is it's where my kindness meets your suffering and I encourage you to flourish. Sometimes I think in the Western mind there's a feeling that compassion is very much about the suffering side of things, but actually if I'm not flourishing then I'm suffering. So a compassionate community is a place that makes space for human flourishing. It's creative, it's spontaneous, it's playful. There's a world of possibility in a compassionate community. It could be a hospital, it could be a place that was currently called a care home or a nursing home. And the difficulty that we face when we think about care homes and nursing homes is that we just take a moment, we are defining a place, defining the people in a place by their need for care. And I see some places that have got really consistently high ratings, perhaps with the CQC and that sort of thing, but there's still some sense for me in which sometimes there's a real imbalance, and it's the people that live in a place that all the focus is on, but perhaps the people that work in a place or the loved ones of the people that live in that place somehow are at the edge of things. So a compassionate community is a place of equality, a place where people can express their nature, which I believe is to be compassionate. So in the compassionate community, I know that I belong. I know that I can express myself. I have a voice. I will be respected. My days will have meaning and purpose, and I'll be able to make my own unique contribution to that place. So a lot of our work is about, if you like, the kind of institutional space where the potential is that I lose this sharp sense that I matter. But actually, if we just extend our thinking out, a compassionate community can be a town or a village or a school and then we can start to think about the interconnectedness between, let's say, the nursing homes in a city that become compassionate communities and how they can actually be the catalyst for connection across that community, where the florist gets involved and the photographer gets involved and the horticultural students get involved and the life story students come in and work with the elders and the children from the local primary school and the faith group. So I'm really interested in the idea that we can completely flip the way we're seeing care homes and nursing homes at the moment and see them as the catalyst for the community to most fully express its nature, which is to be compassionate. And there's lots of assumptions in people's minds. You'll hear people say, oh, there is no community anymore, or people don't look out for each other. My experience is we just need to have the confidence to ask each other. And when we start to look outwards into what we call the community from, let's say, the care home, and we begin to imagine and perceive all the interconnectedness that exists from the elders that are living in that place and the lives that they've lived in that town, then there's something that can be activated that's very rich and powerful and exciting, where we can connect with, let's say, the environmental community, or connect with the artistic community, or the lifelong learning community, and we can bring these threads together and say, in a sense, how is the way that we are responding to, let's say, aging, or an aspect of my life has made me vulnerable, and that means that there's some care that I need every day. How are we collectively responding to that and rising to the challenge of involving, including, enabling, so that my life continues to mean something? And I think there's a real risk that if you see me as somebody that needs care now, that I'm diminished in your mind. Even if you're somebody who believes about yourself that you value and respect people, there's still this thing that happens, I think, where I've become a resident, or some other term is used, and I'm part of the other. There's a sense of otherness. So I think what compassion can offer, and for me it's a very profound gift, it can soften the boundaries between me and you. It can soften the boundaries between the staff and, let's say, the residents, and so that we feel part of a more harmonious community in which we connect on the level of humanity. And I think when we do that, what then happens is that we we more naturally show our virtues. We listen more deeply, we connect more deeply, we're more present, we're more likely to have a smile on our face. For me, this is really what we notice in our work. It's really connected with happiness and confidence. So that when people make this shift and they genuinely feel part of a compassionate community, what gets released is their best self. And in that space is creativity, spontaneity. I quite naturally involve people in the compassionate community because it just feels like the right thing to do. And it's my nature to do that. You know, with your long service to human services, I wonder just kind of what thoughts arise for you really in hearing that.
I love the vision. I love how huge it is. I love the potential impact of it on everybody in a community. That feels really exciting to me. And I can see the threads of some of the things that people have been doing around building community capacity or asset-based community development, and how there are some similarities there. I had struggled with the word compassion for a while, and you articulated that beautifully. There is that notion in Western society of it being connected to suffering. And I know, some of the people that I know who are cancer survivors really not engaging or not appreciating compassion being a term used to them. But the way that you describe it, I can see where that comes from and see the difference that can make.
So Helen, tell us about person-centred practices and what are your thoughts on how they could contribute to the development of compassionate communities?
Well, person-centred practices are a range of very practical tools, as you can imagine, from a one-page profile right through to a person-centred review, that can be used on a day-to-day basis, both with people who are receiving support, with staff, at a management level. In fact, a couple of days ago, I heard about one-page profiles being used in a big pharmaceutical company as well. So my dream, actually, is they just become part of how we do business together, because they're rooted, as within a compassionate community, in a fundamental belief in equality, in people having choice and control in their own lives, about people being appreciated for what they're great at, for people being known for what matters to them, and on the understanding that we all need support of some kind, and being able to ask for that and negotiate it is an important part of working together, being together, the way families are together, and the way communities are together. So let's talk about one-page profiles as an example of one of the person-centred practices that can help deliver the vision that you've just been talking about. And I think, to talk from experience, we've been working at Bruce Lodge, which is a care home where 43 people who live with dementia live, and a large staff team. And every member of that team has a one-page profile, and every person who lives at Bruce Lodge has a one-page profile as well. And one of the things that we did is we took all the appreciations from the staff one-page profiles and all the appreciations from the people who live there one-page profiles, and created a huge Wordle which has all those words in it together, and then had that framed, and it sits at the entrance of the home. And the label underneath says what people who live and work at Bruce Lodge appreciate about one another. And that kind of feels like the spirit of what you're talking about. But one of the other things is, I loved the phrase that you use about softening the edges of people's relationships together. And I think one-page profiles have got a contribution to that, because they recognise that there are things that matter to staff. And if I know what matters to you, we have a different place to start a conversation from. So you and I are sat here being filmed today, and I've met Will for the first time. And if Will had seen my one-page profile, we could have started off a conversation of my lug of single malt whiskies, or he could ask me whether I'm still training to be a black belt, or whether I've achieved that or not, or what I'm planning for the garden next year. And as soon as you've got a connection around something that matters to you, your conversation can go to a different place, and you feel differently about each other. To prepare for Sky launching their resource last week called Getting to Know You, I spent some time with some of the CEOs of different organisations like Andrew Sutcliffe, like Jeremy, the CEO of the Alzheimer's Society, and was privileged just to have an hour with them on the phone to get started with their one-page profile. And for every person that I did that with, I just felt so differently personally about them, now that I knew a bit more about what made them tick and also about what support they needed as well. So next time I had the opportunity to bump into Jeremy, I would feel different about our relationship and would start the conversation in a different place. And I think the breaking down those boundaries, those power relationships, however you describe it, is one of the contributions of one-page profiles. But fundamentally, I don't think we can deliver personalisation without knowing what matters to people and knowing what good support looks like. Because it's only when we know that we can start thinking about what choice and control really means for an individual.
It's so wonderful to sit with you and witness your passion and your enthusiasm and how fully you embody and live the one-page profile, the person-centered practice, what matters to you. I'm really excited about the contribution and the connection between thinking about, perhaps one way we could think about it is compassionate community makes the space for me to reimagine what could happen here, and then there's a sharp sense of individuality for every human being that's here, and that's, for me, feels like the one-page profile. We have 3 compassion habits that we feel passionate about, that we notice when we can get these habits within a culture, then things begin to really shift in terms of the sorts of things that happen. And the habits are listening, asking, and thanking. And it seems to me that the one-page profile is a really powerful, probably quite clock time efficient, health and social care is very busy, way to generate, not only to demonstrate to you that I'm here, that I'm listening, that I'm curious, that I want to know who you are, but that I've heard you and that I appreciate you and that I've made more clear what it is that I and others like and admire about you. So I feel really excited about it. I've got goosebumps, which always lets me know that I'm excited. And I think that this is kind of the applied compassionate community. It's in action, it's embodied, it's systematic. And where there is the challenge in a hospital, or some folks are living with maybe 100 other people in some of the dementia care homes that have been designed, then the risk is I get left out. So we need to be I think we need to be very interested in what systems and habits we can cultivate and create in the place of the systems and habits that I feel are part of the compliance paradigm. So when our job is about ticking boxes and following the sort of, if you like, more rule-based way of thinking, some of the habits and systems that we end up with can be quite unconsciously very dehumanizing. So the way that I think about the one-page profile is it really serves as a way for human beings to really connect up with what matters to each other. And that's just wonderful. So thank you.
I think you're right. I think that's a lovely way of describing it, of the compassionate community creating the space and the environment where these very practical tools can be used to demonstrate what compassion in practice looks like. And I think it was one of your tweets where I spotted the 3 habits that you've just described and how in a one-page profile it feels like they are captured. So the knowing what we appreciate about each other is such a countercultural thing to do in care homes, in hospitals, even in families and society. So by deliberately asking those questions and asking those questions of each other, we've seen families, cry and get upset because this is the first time anybody has asked them what they love, value and appreciate about their mum or their father in a care home. And then asking questions, and all what a one-page profile is really is a summary of some great conversations that captures the essence of who the person is. It's not a likes and dislikes list. It's what really, really matters to the person. So Andy, if we were working on yours now, I'd be asking you, what a good day looks like for you and what a bad day looks like for you. And then using your answers to take that conversation further. Asking what a typical weekend looks like, the most brilliant weekend and the most awful weekend. And if Kirsty was ever to want to make sure you have the most miserable day ever. We know she never would, but she knows you well enough to be able to communicate some of the things that would really be distressing and upsetting for you, and it's from those we can learn what good support looks like for you. So learning some of those things about you and your life are the things that have to happen every week for your week to make sense for you. When life is more difficult, when you're feeling stressed, what are the things you do to look after yourself? I know the self-compassion that you talk a lot about as well. You know, great one-page profiles capture all that information about a person. But my nightmare is they're just seen as the new trendy paperwork, that somehow having a one-page profile just becomes the new tick box that nobody ever uses or makes a difference. So I think both having the one-page profiles and them being used in day-to-day practice is what we're really, really hoping for. So back in a care home, I think the one-page profile becomes the job description of whoever is supporting that individual. I think a colleague's one-page profile, a staff member's one-page profile, is the job description also for the manager, because it tells the manager what great support looks like for that staff member. But equally, the manager's one-page profile is a way of communicating to the staff team what good support looks like for them. And I think that gets us closer to the equality that you've described in a compassionate community.
It feels like a context has been created in the aftermath of what happened in Mid Staffordshire Hospital with the Francis report and the dreadful abuse that was witnessed at Winterbourne View. Two major catastrophic failings have come to the surface in the health and social care system. And the context for me that's been created by that is a space for rich conversation about how do we humanise health and social care services. And with that, I detect a tremendous risk of tokenism and a tremendous risk of getting hold of these one-page profiles and saying, let's tick that box. And so I think there's something about how do we make space for the spirit of the compassionate and community and the person-centred practices to come together, so that the kind of leadership that's needed is embodied, and that the leaders are bringing a humility and that they are understanding that this is a different paradigm. It's a different way of thinking. It's an entirely different map. It's a map in which every person knows that they matter, and the care and support that they need as part of a good life is a given. So we're no longer, for example, measuring the care that we give. We're wondering about the quality of people's lives, and we're making an assumption, well, of course we're getting the care right. So I think within the thinking about the one-page profile and within the space that's created within the thinking about the compassionate community invites us to ask very different questions around what is it that we are seeking to create here. And for me, if I think very personally, my greatest fear is that there's a point in my life where people think I have nothing to give, and that I'm now defined by my need for care. And I'm not interested in how wonderful that care is. If you don't see me as a human being that still has a contribution to make, then I feel full of fear. So I think that there's something emerging in our conversation around when we integrate the notion that compassion is our nature. We have three principles that we think about in the compassionate community. The first one is regard for self. Everyone matters. The second one is love of community. So all good things that happen in the world are to some degree part of community and coming together and creating a good place together. And the third one is harmony with nature, by which we mean it is our nature to be compassionate.
I think you're absolutely right. We have to get a really good alignment of the principles that underpin compassionate communities and the day-to-day practices that we want to see, and not let people get lost in the fascination of tools and think that actually doing the tools is what the outcome is. That's not the outcome. The outcome is people having their lives that make sense to them, and that we all work together to create that and be part of compassionate communities. And it has to start, or not necessarily just start, but it has to be embodied in the way that a staff team works together as well. So sometimes when we start working in a place, we won't start with the individuals that the care home or the hospital is focused on. We might just start with how the staff teams meet together. Because I think our meetings are a microcosm of the culture of the organisation. And very often, one person might be in control of it. One person might do all the work in it, send out the agenda, chair the meeting, perhaps even do the minutes afterwards. They may not be opportunities for people to think well, or to talk, or to contribute. So very often, and I know that you are equally passionate about Nancy Kline's work as we are, but helping people think and be together differently in meetings by sharing roles, by using gifts, by using rounds and time talks so people listen to each other well, is a way of communicating and enabling people to experience the changes that we're hoping to see everywhere. So if you can help people meet differently together, if you can help staff think about their own lives and their histories, and I know that David Sheard is very, part of the work that he does is really about staff, everybody reflecting on their personal histories as a way of understanding each other differently. And I know that a lot of life history work has been common supporting people living with dementia. And I think that's really important to have a different understanding of each other. But equally, and I know you have this in your work as well, it's about what matters now and people's hopes and aspirations for the future. And we have to learn all three things about each other as colleagues, as managers, and about as individuals who need support. Where have you come from? What matters to you now? What does good support look like? What do people value and appreciate about you? And what are your hopes for the future?
It's inspiring to hear you share your perspective on meetings, and like you, we've found transforming that space to be a symbol, if you like, an organisational symbol that we're doing things differently. And it's powerful, isn't it? If your experience of coming to meetings is very passive, or that you expect to be dominated, or you expect to read through an agenda and you're asked what you think and you're brought into the space. And we're really noticing in the compassionate community work that we're doing about the power of hospitality, actually, and about the power of making people feel welcome even as they step into the space. So we're really aligned around the power of meetings practices in changing health and social care. I think the other thing that feels powerful for us is to encourage people to develop a personal practice. Because if I've chosen a path of life which means at this point that I'm involved in being with people who are aging, being with people whose bodies may be failing them, or people may be facing cognitive challenges, or maybe living with a physical or a learning disability, then what goes with that is a demand on me. It might be a demand physically, or it might be a demand emotionally, and it could be that I'm not only in the life of that person, I'm in the life of that family. So how do I remain resilient? And I think there's a myth that, we hear language like compassion fatigue and burnout, and there's a myth that as I care for you, if I care too much, I might burn out. But actually, what the research is telling us is that it's when I step back from my values that I burn out. And actually, as long as I include myself in my world of compassion, and this is what's key, there is no limit to my ability to care for you. So if I top myself up day after day after day after day, there is no limit. And so in the Western mind, sometimes we think of self-care as selfish, but the way I think about it is it's selfless. Because if I take the ultimate responsibility, which is for my own life and my own self-care, then I have the resilience that's needed to keep showing up without taking your sorrow, to being in your life, to being in the life of your mum or your dad or your son or your daughter, and being present. One of the things that we've been working with recently is the idea of a compassion warrior, a compassion samurai. So the samurai philosophy is about living with honour and respect. And if you don't take care of yourself, and if you're not self-aware as a samurai, you're not going to survive. And what we've been thinking about is, if I'm a nurse and I don't take care of myself, I'm not going to survive. And I'm going to adapt poorly to that environment and either leave or perhaps not live my values. So I think this idea of self-compassion being right at the heart of the compassionate community, again, is very powerful in terms of the one-page profile. Because in that one-page profile, it's an invitation for me to become more self-aware, for me to bring to the surface what a good day looks like for me. And that balance of giving to others and giving to self feels absolutely integral to the sustainability of these environments where we're organising things. There are 1 million encounters in the NHS every 36 hours. There's a lot to do, so we need people who are very present, who are available as we think it. Their mind is quiet, their heart is open, and they're in a state of compassion. And then when we listen, we ask, we thank, we focus, it's very, very powerful what can be sustained. So what's exciting for me about the integration of person-centered practices and thinking about leading for compassion, leading compassionate communities, is that when the leader moves on, the habits can remain. So these are sustainable practices. This is the way we do things around here. We're routinely curious, we're always listening, we're always appreciative in style. And what that means is that it's safe for me to live here, it's safe for me to work here, it's safe for me to be here. This is a good place. And then there's a sense of humility and discipline that comes into the leadership role. So for me, we're moving beyond the need for hero leaders. The way I think about it is we need host leaders that create space for people to thrive and emerge with those meetings that you were speaking about. So that, to borrow from Paul Gilbert's thinking from the compassionate mind, we're creating spaces which are nurturing and soothing rather than spaces that are threatening. And another person that's been massively influential for me is John Kabat-Zinn, with his teaching around the full catastrophe, living the full catastrophe and the mindfulness. So again, here I am, I'm present, here I am, here we are. We can create a world of compassion.
The notion of self-compassion with this really, I think, goes further than certainly what I've been thinking about in relation to supporting people to do this work well. And one-page profiles, as you say, capture what good support looks like, but I think that self-compassion takes that even further. And one of the things that we focus on is bringing the whole person to work. So both in terms of how you take care of yourself and self-compassion, but also who you are in terms of your gifts, hobbies, interests and passions in life as well. And I think some of the work that we've done with a national provider, most recently in a care home, is how can we match people who've got similar interests and hobbies and passions, as well as matching them for personality characteristics and people who naturally get on well. So in the work at Bruce Lodge, people had a little bit of time each month to do something that was important to them. And typically that would be outside of the care home. So Ken was a professional footballer before he came to live at Bruce Lodge. He used to play for Stockport County. And naturally what he really wanted to do was to go back and reconnect with the footballing community, with his colleagues and his fans in Stockport County. And because at Bruce Lodge all the staff members have a one-page profile, we'd gone a bit further, and actually not only have we got what matters to you now, but if I could, I would. And Sarah had never been to a football match, always wanted to go to a football match. So Lisa, the manager, matched Sarah with Ken to go to football, because it gave Ken an opportunity to be an expert, to contribute, to share his knowledge and love of football with somebody who wanted to learn that and to experience that for themselves. So I think some of what has to be present in compassionate communities, and I know that you agree with this, is people finding their own sense of purpose, finding their own way to make a contribution, and us to be listening and hearing for that, whether that's people living with dementia or in hospitals or wherever people are, but paying attention to people's purpose and their personal passions and interests, as well as what good support looks like, as well as people taking care of themselves. How do you see the future? What would you like to see in terms of your work going bigger, faster, further and broader?
I worked for many years in service of people with learning disabilities, and there wasn't a safe space for me to reflect. And I got burnt out several times, and that was difficult for me and my family. So the way that I see the work going is that there are regular safe spaces for people within the community to be together. People from all parts of the community to sit together. We have we've designed something called the Compassion Circle, which takes an hour, 12 people at a time, has a host and a facilitator. It's a very simple practice. We imagine what we would want or do want from the community. We take some time to think about self-compassion, and then we imagine creating a world of compassion around us. And it's consistently powerful. And I imagine a wave of compassion where these compassion circles are happening, and people within the circle not only have the precious opportunity to sit together regularly to reflect and reconnect, but they all have a one-page profile. so that they are supported, they have a sharp sense of self, they have a sharp sense that they matter. And the bigger thinking, what we've been exploring around the compassionate community, the person-centered practice, the habits that get embedded are people take care of themselves, they take care of each other in these circles, and there's a way that that's conveyed and communicated systematically, which is the one-page profile.
So I'm excited about a future where there are compassionate communities everywhere, and where person-centered practices are part of the ways that that's demonstrated in practice. I would hope that in the future nobody does a one-page profile without understanding why, the purpose of doing it, and that it's used within the context of that purpose. But we go so much further than one-page profiles, because I think it's person-centered reviews that really help us listen and have conversations in a different way, in a kind of space, in the way that you describe compassion circles, but that we can genuinely have conversations about what's working and not working for you now. You know, what is it that you'd like to see happening in your future? But equally, what's working and not working from my perspective about your life, and thinking about different contributions to move that forward as well. And I've just come from a meeting where some colleagues are going through some huge changes in a national organisation. And we were looking at doing something called stress and support that says, you know, what are the kind of things that make you stressed? How would you, your colleagues, your partner know that you're feeling stressed? What can you do to look after yourself, the self-compassion element about it? And also, what can your colleagues be doing to support you as well? And I think if we're working from those kinds of principles and using some practical tools to embody that and to make that happen. But there's also things like, we use the term community circles in a different way, around a really intentional gathering of individuals around somebody and thinking about their future with them, about what the purpose of the circle is, and aligning friends, family and community around an individual to help them move on as well. So seeing person-centered practices used in schools. So already there's one local authority that's committed to every child, primary, secondary, special school, having a one-page profile. That's even more powerful when teachers and teaching assistants and head teachers have one-page profiles as well. There are 2 hospitals in the UK, whereas if you were admitted to that hospital, every morning they'd ask you, what does a good day look like? And they'd write on the whiteboard behind your head what a good day looks like for you. And they'd all share responsibility together for trying to make that happen. And the conversation that gets written up about what a good day looks like will be next to your one-page profile, whether that's at the end of your bed or tucked behind you at the head of the bed. So we're starting to see, you know, in some organisations, in some schools, in some hospitals, in some care homes, using some person-centred practices, starting with one-page profiles, perhaps following on with person-centred reviews, thinking differently about the way they work together as a team, through person-centred teams, supervision, through meetings being differently as well. So I have some glimmers of what society could look like and how it could be different. But I think the way that you capture it in a compassionate community really communicates that the most powerfully. So in my future dreams, it would be compassionate communities everywhere, homes, schools, hospitals, universities, you know, civic functions as well, churches everywhere, and person-centred practices being part of the contribution to making that happen. The end. Wonderful.